All right, Chris, I think we're good to get started. Want to kick us off?
Perfect. All right. Well, thank you everyone very much for taking the time to jump on. I see we already have some regulars from the last webinar that we ran a little while ago now during our email launch, I believe. So good to see some of y'all back for another one. Really hoping to sort of put a few more of these out, create a bit more content for people to especially the technical side, give people a bit more information and insight into how we run migrations here at Movebot, and yeah, really how to have successful migrations with the cloud. So yeah, little face on the card there for me. For those that don't know me, I'm Chris Roy. I'm a solutions architect here at Movebot. I'm based in Vancouver, BC, and I have been working with the Movebot team pretty much since day dot, actually. And I've got my co-host here, Maddy. I'll let her introduce herself and yeah.
Thanks, Chris. So I'm Maddy Feliciano. I recently joined Movebot, but I've been working on migrations for over 6 years. I'm a principal customer success engineer here. So I'm working on support as well as working with our partners to ensure successful migrations. I'm based in Kansas City, Missouri, originally from San Francisco. So out here in the almost south in the Midwest.
Cool. Awesome. So yeah, today really going on in deep on sort of on-prem to cloud migrations, and trying to give everyone a bit of an understanding on how to ensure successful migrations. I thought
So
we'd sorry.
So why we're seeing companies move to the cloud is supporting remote work. With COVID-19, a lot of people moved not only to remote work, but to hybrid environments and saw many of the benefits around being able to work from different locations. So even if companies are still traditional structure, they're working in the office, many people like to be able to access their content and work when they're at home as well. Another benefit we see to moving to the cloud is security. All of the platforms we'll discuss today have built-in security features, which is great. And we've seen a lot of people make a switch from on-prem environments when they're having to comply with cyber insurance requirements. All the platforms we'll discuss today can meet those needs. Improved collaboration is another benefit. So many tools, Google Workspace, Microsoft 365, have options like commenting on files, chatting within files themselves, which you don't get the benefit of on on-prem infrastructure. So you're able to work with all your colleagues in the same location, in different locations in real time on those files. You also don't have to deal with versioning that you might be dealing with in an old on-prem environment. Everything just is able to update as you work on it. No conflict avoidance or anything like that. Cost savings are another driver to move to the cloud. With the built-in security, the built infrastructure for you, you aren't having to handle those things, and they're also flexible and scalable. So with your on-prem infrastructure, you're having to buy physical equipment, you're having people having to maintain that equipment, ensure it's in working order, do any bug fixes, any patches that need to be done. With cloud environments, that is taken off your shoulders, and you can rely on that environment to scale as you need. You can increase users, increase storage size as you need without having to buy additional equipment.
Yeah, some good stuff there. I'm sure a number of you have sort of been through the cloud process already, and some of you may be kind of still just getting started as this kind of transition to the cloud continues for a number of organizations. A little bit about Movebot. So we are obviously a cloud-based storage migration tool. We started out moving data. We now, as you'll see here, also do emails. And we really designed Movebot to make migrations of both small and large organizations really simple, efficient, and incredibly fast. There's a lot of legacy methods that people have used to do stuff. We have another product that focuses on cloud SFTP, and the number of people that we saw are trying to move, 1 million files or so using SFTP was pretty shocking. And that was actually one of the catalysts for kind of Movebot coming about. Just this idea that, having a really simple, easy to use tool that helps you out in kind of the modern age with all of these various migration methods that you might have going on. So obviously, as you're going through this transition, there's a few things to kind of keep an eye out for, and there are about 5 kind of key points that we feel are really where we see a lot of companies kind of get tripped up on this transition to the cloud. One of these is, and probably the biggest one, is the folder hierarchy. So obviously, in an on-premise environment, it's really focused around a restrictive kind of mindset. You have a very deep hierarchy, and it's often lots of nested folders. Cloud platforms are more focused around a horizontal approach. So instead of having lots of really deep nesting, you'll often have quite a large spread horizontally. And that sort of ties into the permission structuring as well, where in an on-premise environment, you might have a lot of what could easily be referred to as restricted folders, folders where you have complex permission structures. That doesn't translate super well into the cloud with this horizontal approach. The horizontal approach encourages you to sort of divvy things up via business units and focus on creating sort of teams or drives relevant to those business units. With your permission structure, you can then focus on using simple groups to manage the sharing and permission control on those specific drives and business units. Another thing that we sort of see people get caught out with is starting with the wrong tool for the job. I mentioned before, we see a lot of people used to see a lot of people trying to use SFTP to transfer data. There's a lot of sort of roll your own tools and bundled together options that you can kind of get with some open source stuff. And, if you pick the wrong tool for the job, it can really leave you in quite the pickle. The combination of that and leaving it to the last minute on a Friday evening right before your cutover is kind of nightmare fuel. I'm sure plenty of people have sort of been in that situation before or seen that situation before, and it can be incredibly frustrating. So really ensuring that you have the right tool for the job, and that you're giving yourself plenty of time to get everything completed. Another thing is the testing. So when you are running these projects, there's obviously quite a few things to keep an eye out for as you're transitioning. It's really great to sort of run some tests out front, get a POC going. And when you're running those POCs, we really recommend that you engage all of your stakeholders and find people who are actually using the data to jump in after you've moved a small amount across and check that they are happy with the results. There's very commonly, it's difficult to tell exactly how users are interacting with data and what sort of quirks or special things that they might be doing. And so, having those users jump in and have a poke around, they're going to tell you very quickly if there's things that they need changed or need to be aware of. And so running those tests is really great. And obviously, if they do raise some concerns around the results of the test, you may find that actually it's just a lack of training. And so ensuring that the users are aware of the platforms that they're migrating to and understand some of those key differences between how they're going to be interacting with the data compared to when they were operating in a in your on-prem file server environment. It is a very awesome and easy to use tool. The collaboration stuff is really, great, but it is a bit of a different mindset. And so, getting your users up to speed and helping them transition through that is really crucial. Up next, we're going to touch on some of the common cloud platforms and go through some of the differences and constraints with those platforms. So we've got four of our kind of top platforms that we see people working with that we want to walk you through and take a look at that. Just before we get into that, a little bit of a pop quiz. I'm sure people have some interesting ideas around that, and we're just curious. Where do you think people are moving most with Movebot? Out of the sort of storage solutions, is there anything in particular you think people are really using? And just drop a note in the chat. We'll give you guys a minute, and we'll see what you guys think. I see Matt's come in with 365 and Google. Cynthia's Dropbox. Let's give it a couple minutes, see if we've got any more suggestions coming through there. It's always a bit of fun seeing. I think there's probably an obvious answer, and then a couple of others. Oh yes, Microsoft kind of got put through the ringer a bit last week with the.
But it was not. It was not Microsoft. It was CrowdStrike.
Exactly. Cool. Sue reckons on-prem. Interesting. So this is specifically for destinations in this instance, and so obviously the answer is SharePoint and Microsoft. That was pretty much a given on that front. But it's actually also Ignite. We see a large number of people sort of transitioning to Ignite as a destination, and that might become a little clearer as we kind of go through. I just note as well, we're not here to sell any of these platforms. We're here to sort of tell you a bit about Movebot and give you some insight into these. We obviously don't work for these vendors, and so the information we have here is sort of based on the experience that we have and sort of what we've seen while going through a lot of these migrations. And looking forward to sort of sharing that with you. So I think Maddy's going to run us through Microsoft first.
So Microsoft 365, formerly called Office 365. People love to change names up to keep us stumbling. It is a full collaboration system. So some of the systems we'll talk about today will just really be focused on file content, folder content, and other ones will have options like Microsoft 365 of email, calendars, video calls, chat, along with the features like SharePoint and OneDrive, which would be your two destinations for shared folders or individual user folders. Microsoft and all the platforms we'll talk about today do have desktop client applications. So one concern I've come across when people are wanting to move to the cloud is that some of their users still like clicking on their mounted drive. That's how they've accessed files forever. They don't want to change their workflow when they are moving to a cloud system. Other users are really excited and can't wait to get started working on the web, but every single platform we'll talk about today does have a desktop application that that type of user could interact with your data in the older way if they wanted to do so. So with 365, you have SharePoint, which is going to be your shared sites. So if you have a shared folder that's a team folder, department folder on-prem, SharePoint would be your destination. OneDrive is for individual user content. So if you have a user folder, content would go there. SharePoint and OneDrive do have some limitations. SharePoint, you cannot break permission inheritance on libraries and folders that contain more than 100,000 items. And then OneDrive folders, you can't put more than 50,000 items into a folder and share it. Note on both those limitations, those are very, very high item numbers right there. As Chris mentioned earlier, we recommend staying as flat as possible in your hierarchy when moving to the cloud. And so even though you can go up to these numbers, if you can stay lower, it will be a better user experience. Can you hop to the next slide, Chris?
Yeah, I just wanted to just touch on that as well briefly, was that you know, when you're going into SharePoint, you do have this concept of sites, and for anyone that's not familiar, a site is actually used for like, it's for communication. It's kind of like an intranet site, and within that you have document libraries, which are where the data is stored. For anyone that's not aware, it's just worth making that distinction, that you kind of have a couple of layers there. SharePoint provides a number of extra features on top, other than just the storage component of document libraries as well. And yeah, obviously, you know, as Maddy mentioned, for all of these platforms, you know, breaking things up into multiple kind of document libraries or you know, shared drives is really kind of based on business unit, is really helpful for ensuring good performance long term.
Thanks, Chris.
Cool. So moving on, we've got Google Workspace, and this is Maddy's favorite. She's very familiar with the Google, so we'll let Maddy sort of run through this as well.
So Google and Microsoft, I would say, have one-to-one features. How you would implement things are a little bit different, but you have, again, mail, calendar, video calls, chat, Google file types. So on Microsoft, you get access to Excel, Word, all your standard file types there. With Google, you get Google Docs, Google Sheets, Slides, all their native file types to collaborate on. A lot of small businesses and tech companies like us do use Google. I've definitely used Google in many roles I've been in, and I am a fan. But as I said, Microsoft has a lot of the same features, so it comes down to preference at that point. There's two different file storage options in Google. One would be shared drives, and that content's owned by the organization, whereas My Drives are owned by the individual user. Google's a little bit different than other systems on how ownership works. In My Drive instances, if you create the content, even if it's in a folder shared from another user, you still own the content. In shared drives, since the organization owns the content, then no user ownership is given. That's really good if you're ever offboarding users so that the content stays static, so it's easily accessible in the future, even if someone has left the organization. One difference in Google from some other systems is shared drives use waterfall permissions. That means you cannot break inheritance anywhere down that shared drive. So we'll be doing a demo in a little bit here, and we'll talk about that in more detail. But shared drives are designed so that users can access everything in the subfolders that are granted access at the root level. You can, at this time, share out subfolders, but I can tell you from a Google admin perspective, it is a lot easier to audit permissions if you just keep those top level within the system. Shared drives did recently increase their item limit to 500,000 items and 100 nested folders per shared drive. This changed within about the last week or so. So although Google has published the documentation change, we are still seeing on the client side that they're showing that 400,000 item limit. So we're not sure when that's going to change, but we're keeping our eyes open on when we're able to push more data that way. As I mentioned with Microsoft, these limits exist. I would always recommend to stay well below them for easy interactivity with your content, ease of use with permissions, but it is possible to push quite a bit of content into shared drives or My Drive.
Wonderful. Cheers, Maddy. Next up, we have Ignite. So one of the things with Ignite and sort of a key differentiator here is that it really looks and feels like a file server. When you're using it, it's really helpful for people that have a lot of heavy security requirements and want that traditional file server look and feel. The way that sort of presents itself and the actual use of the product is that they have a common shared space. So that is basically a single root location where all shared data exists. So that would be all of your business units, any kind of content that teams are going to be collaborating on and working on. And the implementation in Ignite, there's very limited performance cost or limitations associated with sort of deep folder nesting and permissions the same way that there are with some of these other cloud options. With that being said, the recommendation provided, sort of this flatter structure is still always, a nice way to keep things structured and does have a lot of benefits overall. For those that aren't really in a position to transition to that just yet, Ignite can be really useful for those for retaining a very similar structure to that on-prem server. Obviously, you also have private data spaces available where users can store their individual files and folders that are not accessible by the wider team. This is comparable to OneDrive or My Drive as well. The one thing to note that is different with the private user spaces is there is no user-to-user sharing. So if I was to have a document stored in my personal space, I cannot share that document out to another user or group within the organization. For other users or groups within the organization to be able to access it, I would have to transfer that file into the common shared space. So very similar to that on-prem file server, but a bit limiting compared to some of the other sort of collaboration suites available. The other thing that Ignite offers is they have a caching gateway available for some of like organizations that work with very large files. This is a sort of on-prem appliance that can be used to sort of keep a cache of the larger content and can make the performance a bit better when working with sort of larger files locally as well. So something to note for those that work with very large sort of CAD or video files. And last but not least, we've got Dropbox. So Dropbox is really fantastic if you're working at any kind of media company. They do a lot of work in that space and have some pretty fantastic offerings for those. They focus their company data around this concept of team folders, which again is kind of similar to My Drives, shared drives, but you can sort of nest them and create complex permission structures. So, unlike shared drives, you can actually restrict access to subfolders and create those sort of complex permission structures that you might be familiar with from the on-premise environment. They also have private space as well, and this is again where all of your user data would be stored. And yeah, a couple of minor limits on the Dropbox side. There is a semi-soft limit around the number of items in a team folder, pretty similar to the shared drive limits on Google. The recommendation from Dropbox is really to try to keep things under around 300,000 items per team folder. And yeah, if you exceed it, you can exceed it, but you're more likely to run into permission issues or performance related items to do with syncing and the like. So really coming back to that idea of flattening out your data, or making use of a wider structure to store that content, rather than just putting, all 2.5 million files for your organization in one big team folder that you call X Drive, for example. That sort of has huge negation on all of the benefits of cloud. And so, yeah, really important to kind of keep that stuff in mind. The other thing to note here is that when you're working with shared folders, so these are folders that are stored within a specific user's private space, you cannot share more than 1,500 folders within a single parent. So if you have one, X Drive folder that you've got, and then you wanted to create unique permissions on 1,500 subfolders, that is going to run into issues there as well. So again, these limits are there to sort of encourage this transition to a flatter structure with a more simplified permission structure that really encourages collaboration and sharing. Cool. So that is a little bit of an overview of all of our kind of top cloud storage platforms that we're working with. And just to kind of summarize a couple of key themes here, I kind of touched on it on that last slide, but flattening out the data, nested folders, they're really not suitable for the cloud when you have a really deep structure. And so, splitting it out into multiple sites, team drives, shared drives, whatever platform you're kind of working with, you can really see some pretty substantial benefits. And by doing that, you're also giving yourself the opportunity to again focus on those permissions. When we're doing on-prem to cloud migrations, we generally speaking recommend that you take an audit of the permissions on-prem. But don't necessarily transfer them across automatically, at least. You would basically review the structure that is in place and come up with a sort of suitable replacement for the cloud. And if you've got your folder structure flattened out and organized nicely, you'll pretty much find that the permissions come very naturally after that, and that it's not a whole lot of work, because you're no longer opting for those very deep, complex permission structures and folder structures. Cool. So we're going to talk a little bit about the Movebot method. This is how we would approach these migrations. We're actually running another webinar on this in a couple of weeks' time, really getting into the nitty-gritty of the sort of Movebot best practices and how we recommend people approach these migrations. Really, though, it boils down to these 3 steps that you see here, which is the plan, advance, and cutover. Plan stage is really just around getting a lay of the land, understanding exactly what you have in your source environment, reviewing your permissions, determining whether or not there's any sort of things to be aware of with regards to your permission structure or folder structure, and whether or not you might need to make any changes there. You'll obviously, as part of this, complete a POC and verify that you're happy with how everything looks in the destination once you've sort of decided on a structure and get an idea of what everything looks like there. The advanced stage is where you're going to be actually transferring the data. And so this stage is called advanced because you're running it in advanced. No more are you doing sort of last minute Friday cutovers. With Movebot, you're really focusing on getting the data across as soon as possible in advance. And then when you get to the cutover stage, the final stage, you're just making use of Delta migrations to bring over the remaining content, make sure everything's all up to date, and that any changed or newly created files are all transitioned over to the destination as well. As
And
I
Chris, one
mentioned,
thing I want to add on here is that when you're using Movebot as a tool for migrations, users can continue to work in that source data. Any deltas you run on Movebot will bring over changes that are made. So there's very little disruption to your user's workflow when you're running a migration with Movebot.
exactly. No, thanks for clarifying, Maddy. Really, it's just as simple as these 3 steps. As I mentioned, we will go into these in a bit more detail in a couple of weeks with the next webinar. And there'll be a link to register for that at the end of this presentation. So we've talked a little bit about the platforms, where some of the key things to be aware of are, and also a bit about how we like to run these migrations from Movebot. We're going to get into a bit of a demo, and we're going to run through and show you how you would go about executing this kind of migration from an on-prem into Google Workspace. One thing to note here is it is a pre-recorded demo. I wasn't quite keen enough to do it all live, but I decided to leave a couple of minor little mistakes in there just to give it that live feeling. So I will share my screen now and we'll switch over to the demo. As we're going through the demo, I will give a bit of insight into what we're actually doing. And if you have any questions, feel free to sing out and I can pause and we can go through anything that crops up along the way as well. Perfect time for a bit of open discussion as well. Cool. So, awesome. Can everyone see the screen okay here? I think that looks pretty good. Awesome. All right, so let's get into it. Obviously, this is the Movebot dashboard, and first thing we're going to do is go ahead and get started with a new project. So we can give it a project name. In this instance, I've called it Webinar Demo. Couple of connections there already, but we're going to go ahead and create a new storage connection. Our source platform in this instance is obviously going to be the on-prem Microsoft Windows connector. You'll see that you give your storage connection a name, and then you're presented with this token down below. This token, please make sure you make a copy of it and save it somewhere safe. It is only displayed during the during that setup window here. We do have then a link to the download, which we can grab and plug into our on-prem server. And so once we've got that downloaded, we can go ahead and configure the cloud connector. Oh, I think that might be running a little fast. Sorry. There we go. That's a little nicer. Yeah, so download the cloud connector, and we can go ahead and open that up from our downloads folder and go through the wizard, and that will get the agent installed. To start the agent, you can browse to your program files and find your Caltrop folder, and it's just the Caltrop Cloud Connector executable there. So we'll start that up, and we'll be prompted to enter in our token. So I'm going to go ahead and copy the token from the Movebot window, and just again, please make sure you take a copy of that. I didn't include that in the demo, but yeah, save that somewhere so that if you need to change it later on, you know where it is. We'll hit update configuration, and yeah, we can see it's all connected and ready to go now. So we'll go ahead and save and test that connection. And we can click on browse at the top here just to verify that everything is online, and we can see our host name is showing there successfully. So we'll close that out and move on to our destination. Cool. So again, in this instance, we'll go ahead and create a new storage connection. This time we're going to select the Google Workspace connector, and we'll zip through and plug in our admin credentials and our admin domain. You can actually specify multiple domains in that domain field if you have secondary domains. It's just comma separated for additional domains that you may wish to add there. Cool. Down the bottom, you'll see that we've created our Google Client ID. That's an automatic process on our side. And so now we'll go through and do the domain delegation. Domain delegation is done from the Google Admin Console, and you just bring up the API controls, not add a new user, just be what you're searching for. So bring up API controls, and it's just under Manage Domain-Wide Delegation. We add our new client ID, and there are some scopes for that client ID available in the documentation link on the connection page. So we'll paste those into our Google Admin Console, and that is going to ensure that Movebot has access to the Google environment and gives us an opportunity to access that data and kind of read the data. I forgot to name my connection here, so just go up and give it a name. I'm just going to call mine Google Workspace. Cool, so we see everything's online and connected, and we can see all of our content showing there as well. Here you have the option to enable permissions. We're not going to be running permission migration as part of this. If you do have upcoming projects where you're looking to migrate permissions from on-prem to cloud, give us a buzz and we'll help you out, answer any questions. We've got great support. Content options can pretty much just be left as default. This is just letting you know that we're going to handle any invalid characters or file names. And actually, I will just kind of pause on, on that page here. So yeah, we will handle any invalid file name characters or bring the mod times across, all this sort of stuff. So this is just all handled automatically. There's not anything that you need to do from your side to make that stuff happen. We will alert you if there are any things that you need to be aware of as part of that process as well. But yeah, you can leave all of these as default. Just a bit of information on that one for you. The settings here as well, you do have a few options. This always use Delta can be a really handy one to enable on your project. Basically just ensures that once you've run your initial migration, you're never going to accidentally remigrate everything all over again. That can be a handy one to enable. Everything else is pretty suitable to leave as default. You do have the option to select your geographic region here as well for any people who are new to Movebot. From this option here, you can actually select where geographically your data will be processed with Movebot. So really good for anyone who is looking for a GDPR compliance or HIPAA compliance and the like. You can ensure that you're meeting your compliance purposes with the region selector there as well. Cool. We're going to leave everything else as default, and we're going to save our settings. You then have the option of running a discovery scan. So the discovery scan is really helpful for that plan stage that we discussed, getting an idea of exactly how much data you have in the source, how it's distributed, and whether or not there's any of those little things to be aware of when you're transitioning. So I'm going to go ahead and select the Z drive, which is where all of my company data is stored. I don't need to worry about scanning the C drive. I just want to know about the company data. So we can see here, I've got a completed scan. It's not got any fancy data in it, but there's a bit of folder structure there that we will take a look at and provide a bit of feedback on. So we can click in on this Z here and actually click into the results and take a look at what we've detected. So we'll go ahead and click in there. Oh, actually, I see we have a couple of questions. Oh, awesome. Maddy has responded to it. Fantastic. Thank you, Maddy. So yeah, here you can see we've got our marketing folder, our accounting folders, and HR and engineering. This is a pretty nice structure already. We've already got some nice business units set up. And so you might be looking at this and thinking, cool, awesome. We can basically just create a shared drive or a SharePoint site or a team folder for each of these kind of business units. That makes a lot of sense. One thing to note here is we have something a little interesting with this accounting folder. So within accounting, we actually have this payroll folder, and payroll has restricted permissions in this instance. You can identify this from the reports, and it will, you can take a look at the permissions and see that this has restricted permissions. And from there, it's important to note that since we're going into Google, we will not be able to translate those permissions across if we were to just take the accounting folder and migrate everything into a single accounting shared drive. The reason being is that once you do that transition, everyone who has access to the accounting shared drive would have access to payroll, which we do not want in this instance. So I'd just like to throw out a question and see if anyone has any suggestions quickly on how we might be able to address that in this instance, ensuring that we can keep restricted access to the payroll folder as part of this migration. Does anyone have any ideas how we might be able to achieve that? Damien's quick out the gate, and yeah, Matt coming in close second, and Sue as well. So I think there's a lot of Google people in the chat here, so people are probably pretty familiar with this already. But yes, we would basically split this out into a separate shared drive. So obviously, as each shared drive can only, the people who have access at the top level have access to everything. We will need to create a separate drive for this payroll data. Cool. So we will go back up a level and we'll take a look at some of the other data that we have configured in this environment. Awesome. So drilling back in, we are also going to take a look at the engineering folders. So within engineering, we see that we have 2 pods. Now, these pods are, in this instance, don't actually have any data, but for demo's sake, we have decided that these 2 folders are very large and will not, could not be transferred into a single shared drive. They're actually exceeding the maximum number of files per shared drive, and so, or collectively they are. And so we're going to split those out into 2 separate shared drives as well. So we have a couple of sort of edge cases in this project, and we're going to work through those 2 together. I'd also like to touch, you have this errors and issues tab here where you can see if there are any potential issues to be aware of as part of this migration. In this instance, we're all happy. And you also have the exports tab where you can download a variety of useful reports related to the project and get an idea of exactly what's happening. So this is useful for downloading failure or flagged issue reports, and also a permissions report, which is really useful for just getting a better understanding of exactly what sort of permissions you have in place on your source before you begin your migration.
I want to add in here, Chris, that when you run a discovery scan, you might see some low severity errors saying things like file name not compatible or needs to be transformed. Since those are default in the project settings, those will go away as soon as you run a migration. It's just kind of a heads up that something is going to change on those files if it's low or medium severity.
Yeah, exactly, Maddy. So yeah, any low or medium errors are actually just warnings, and they can be, generally speaking, safely ignored. So we're going to go ahead and get started with adding some transfers to this project. So we're going to drill into our Z drive, and we have a couple of exceptions or sort of unusual scenarios to work with, but that's limited to our accounting and engineering folders. So we're going to start with HR, which is a very straightforward folder. This one is just going to be mapped one-to-one. So we have already created an HR shared drive in the destination, again, opting for that flat structure. Instead of trying to cram all 4 of these folders into a single shared drive, we're breaking them out into a few different drives. Because we already have the HR shared drive created in the destination, there's an option here with the checkbox, Migrate Folder Contents. What this checkbox does is it toggles whether or not the HR folder will be created in the destination, or whether or not we're just going to take the contents within HR. Now, given we already have an HR drive created and ready to go in the destination, we probably do not need this HR folder to be created within that drive. So we're going to go ahead and click the Migrate Folder Contents option here, and that will ensure that just the contents of HR gets brought over. We won't need to bring everything else across as well. Cool. So we'll go ahead and check that box and move on to selecting our destination. On the destination side here, you'll see a list of all of the shared drives at the top, and then a little further down, you'll also see that we have a list of all of our user My Drives as well. So in this instance, we're going to shared drives, but you do have the option of migrating directly into My Drives further down as well. Cool. Now that we've got HR out of the way, let's move on, and we will get into something a little more interesting with one of our more complicated structures. So we're going to next up work on the accounting folder, and we're going to bring out our payroll folder into another drive. Very similarly to the HR, we already have the payroll folder created in the destination. We do not need the payroll folder to be created, so we have enabled the Migrate Folder Contents option on the Source Selection tab. Scrolling through the destination, we can grab our payroll and add our transfer. So that is our sort of edge case accounted for in the payroll environment. This will ensure that we can retain that restricted environment setup. And we can then sort of move forward with dealing with the remainder of the accounting content. So we'll drill back in, and we will grab our accounting folder and migrate the contents into our new accounting drive on the destination. One thing to note here that's pretty neat is you'll notice that we have 2 transfers. One where we're transferring the entirety of accounting, and one where we're transferring the payroll subfolder. So anyone who's maybe done migrations before is probably thinking, okay, so when I run the accounting folder, I'm going to end up with a copy of payroll there as well as in this separate drive. Movebot is actually smart enough that we recognize when the accounting transfer is run that the payroll folder is mapped as another transfer in this project, and it will automatically be excluded from the accounting transfer. There's no need to get crazy with additional sort of exclusions to ensure that that works as expected. We can just add a secondary transfer and it will recognize the subfolder is already mapped and exclude it. Cool. So next up, we're going to take a look at our engineering folders. I mentioned that the 2 pods within engineering are a little too large to go into a single engineering drive. So we've actually created an engineering pod A and engineering pod B drive in the destination. So we'll go ahead and select pod A and assign that to engineering pod A in the destination. We'll then go ahead and do the same for pod B and bring that across as well. Perfect. And in this instance, there's no content stored in the top level of the engineering folder outside of those 2 pod folders. So there's nothing else that we need to account for by adding a transfer specifically for the engineering folder. As we've been going through the demo, I have been adding these transfers one at a time, just via the web front end. You do also, over here in the top right, have the option to import these transfers via a CSV. This can save a lot of time and make it a lot easier to kind of bulk import your transfers. There is documentation available on our documentation page that you can see here to import those mappings via CSV and all the various different prefixes and methods you can use to import those. Now that we've got everything imported and ready to go, we can go ahead and begin our initial transfer. So we can click Start Full Migration and go on those 5 transfers. And that's going to transition into a pending mode and will be launching resources ready to go for that transfer. And so this is where you would be completing your initial seed migration, and then obviously you'd run subsequent deltas during your cutover phase as well.
One other thing I wanted to note on here is that if you're running lots of transfers at one time, like this, you'll be able to launch different types of migration. So you might just want to launch a scanner simulation or just a delta of data. When you're selecting them all, you can click the 3 little dots next to mark OK, and that will give you the option to start migration with options, where you can choose which type of migration you want to run.
Fantastic. Thank you, Maddy. That's pretty much it for our demonstration. We hope that it's been really useful and provides some helpful insight into how we execute these on-prem to cloud migrations with Movebot. We'd like to open it up a little now for the remainder of the session. If there's any questions regarding the demo or any of the other process that we've been through or information we've provided throughout this demo. And yeah, hope to see you guys at the next one. But for now, if there's any questions, just pipe up in the chat or in the questions tab.
So we did have 2 questions come in. I just want to highlight, in case anyone hasn't seen them, on the questions tab or is watching this recording, that Matt asked. So the first one was, do deltas capture deletions? And the answer to that is, on a delta, content would be updated. So if you're updating files, creating files, that will be replicated in the destination. But if someone went and purged a lot of content, we are not deleting that content in the destination. So it makes updates, but we're not doing any deletions during a migration process. The other question that Matt asked is, are the auditing reports intuitive enough to make sense when you change the folder structure? And my answer is a little complex here because it depends. How intuitive they are depends on how intuitively permissions were originally set on the source. So in a lot of migrations I've run, I do a mix of looking at reports, right, pulling those permissions, and then also talking to the client side. I've seen many, especially on-prem environments, that when you talk to the clients, they didn't know that all these permissions that are on there exist. Someone set them 10 plus years ago. They don't need them. You can make a much more secure and better architected environment on the destination if you do not bring those over. So recommendation is do a mix, look at the reports, and talk to the humans involved. Question from Matt, help me understand the value add for Movebot on a file to SharePoint migration over the free tool in Microsoft. I personally have not used Microsoft's tool. Chris, do you have any experience with that?
Yeah, I think a lot of the time, the value add for a lot of MSPs is having a bit of flexibility, the speed and simplicity for which you can get set up as well. So, being able to get, pardon me, being able to get set up incredibly quickly with Movebot, it's less than 5 minutes or so to kind of get up and running and connected. Everything's ready to go. The ability to sort of pull some really in-depth reports, and also just the simplicity in terms of that 3-step process. It's all very much laid out for you, and makes it really easy for those transitions. The reporting is a big one as well. Getting really in-depth reporting as to exactly what the issues are, and having a lot of those niggly little minor things such as invalid file name characters and the like being handled automatically. And that's a really big thing for a lot of people. I have heard of people who have got stuck specifically with their Microsoft migrations using the free tool, just because of little things like folder names or characters that they've had to spend pretty strenuous amounts of time trying to remediate with another tool.
Any other questions? Well, thank you all for attending today. We will have a webinar coming up on migration best practices in a couple weeks here. Georgia posted the link in the chat earlier, but we'll also make sure to send out information on that. You can reach us if you have any questions at support@movebot.io, or you can utilize the chat that's built into the tool. I know we're seeing a lot of AI nowadays. Our chat is not AI. If you go in that chat in the tool, it goes to support folks like myself and Chris and other team members at Movebot, so you will get a real answer from a real human if you utilize that tool, and we are happy to help. I'm happy to answer questions, and if you have a new project you have questions on, we can even jump on a call and help you with your setup.
Fantastic. Thank you, Maddy. Yep, absolute pleasure spending some time chatting with y'all about on-prem to cloud migrations today. We're looking forward to catching you in a couple of weeks for our best practices. And yeah, hope to see you all there again. Absolute pleasure. Thank you all so much for your time, and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thanks all.
Take care.